CUDO Compute just launched a new industry report called Land, Power and Compute. And the core argument they're making is pretty straightforward. AI infrastructure is no longer being constrained mainly by chips and algorithms. It's being constrained by the physical world, by land, by power, by grid access, by cooling, by permitting, by the speed at which real-world infrastructure can actually be delivered. Now, if you look at the contents, you might well say there's nothing radically new here. But what is very interesting about the report is that it reflects the views of 701 people across the US, UK and Europe who were surveyed earlier this year. And these are the people who are building AI infrastructure today. Now, there's a graphic on page 7 that gives a snapshot of all the different items and how they listed them as priority. Now, what I find interesting is that this gives us an insight into how the people making the actual decisions see the market right now. So you may or may not agree with all of this, but let's face it, we all have opinions, but none of us are the decision makers. Now, also, if you are a hardcore data center or AI factory designer, builder, operator, most of this will not be new to you. But let's face it, for the rest of us who are not in the weeds of that industry, it's not our day job. So I'm looking at this from more of an outside-in perspective, from my own time back in Compaq and Intel, and from years watching people build out data centers and infrastructure. There were 3 things in this report that stood out for me. The first one is the different financial models and how they are evolving. And what comes through quite clearly is that these developments are currently being treated as 3 distinct asset classes: the grid connection, the buildings, and then the consumables, the GPUs inside. And that matters because once you start thinking in those terms, it changes how these projects are funded, who funds them, how they're valued, and ultimately scaled. The second one is around PUE. And that has been the measure of efficiency for a data center facility for many, many years. And it's good, but it's going to have to evolve because the way we design a facility for training AI is physically different from the way you design one for inference. Different designs, different technologies, different layouts. And that means some of the established metrics like PUE may no longer tell the full story of efficiency. And you'll already hear folks talking about other terms like tokens per watt. So those metrics are going to evolve. And the third thing that stood out to me is that the language of the energy industry is starting to come through much more strongly. Terms like off-takers are now showing up much more directly in the conversation. And that's feeding straight into the financial modeling and a lot of the contracts. Now, I found that particularly interesting. Before we used to call them tenants, now they're off-takers, because it just goes to show how tightly linked AI compute infrastructure and the energy industry really has become. Now, beyond that, the report also touches on many other important issues. Skill shortages, public acceptance, which is a hot topic these days as I'm recording this, and some of the broader implications around geopolitics, etc., etc., etc. So it is a complicated landscape. But overall, whether you agree or disagree with every point or any point in the report, I do think it's worthwhile having a read for yourself, because it's not that it's some vendor telling us what the answer is. This is the opinion of people who are building the infrastructure today. So it's pulling together a set of signals that are becoming harder and harder to ignore. Anyway, you can access the report online freely. Have a read and let us know what you think.